Okay, welcome everyone, and hi to Ian. I'm glad you could make it. Um, so we're doing a little study right now on dependent origination. Sorry, I'll just pin here. So last week we listened to Ajahn Brahmali's go over the teaching of the Buddha on dependent origination, which is basically cause and effect. And the Buddha was talking about why do we keep getting reborn? What's sort of the cause of that? And to explain it, he used sort of 3 lifetimes to explain the 12 steps of dependent origination. But people have also used the concept of dependent origination to look at, say, emotional situations that happen in their life day to day, and to help to get sort of more insight or understanding so that you can sort of wake up to the sort of unconscious, unskillful things that you're doing so that life can go more smoothly. And Corey, a couple of weeks ago, shared that she'd always been frightened of dependent origination, which most of us are. It seems it can feel like a heavy topic. But then she spontaneously one day, when she had an emotional situation, just went through the 12 steps, and then it just sort of made total sense to her. So I'm going to read you a chapter from this book. You can see it on there. The Beginner's Guide to Insight Meditation by Ariana Wiseman and Jean Smith. And she talks about using dependent origination with sort of just emotional happenings in our life. So if everyone, and then the plan was next week to do what Corey did, and there won't be a teaching. We're just going to go around the room, the live room and the Zoom room, and have everybody sort of share a scenario. So for those of you at home, if you can get pencil and paper so you can write down the steps, and then I'll be reading this excerpt from the book here, and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you want to listen to it again, you can do that. Okay. So, dependent origination. What inspires our actions? Why do we act the way we do? The Buddha described in 12 steps how our actions come into being and how they can either build our suffering or our happiness. To arise, each of these 12 steps is dependent on the particular conditions of the other steps, and the cycle is called dependent origination. The Buddha's explanation of how we work is complex and may be totally new to you, so take your time with it. You may want to read it several times. Let us begin with the key concept of ignorance. The stories, habit patterns, and other unexamined opinions we have inherited from our past influence the way we experience ourselves and the world we live in. They influence how we see, hear, taste, smell, and experience touch and thoughts. Imagine yourself rowing on a river at sunset. The noises of the afternoon have quieted down, and the sky is a light show of magnificent reds and oranges, and you feel a sense of peace growing inside. Suddenly, your boat is jolted. You turn around, startled, and see that it has been hit by a boat with a woman in it. Furious, you bluster. What the dickens are you doing? Why don't you look where you're going? You grab your oars in anger and start rowing. Now imagine the same scenario, but when you turn to look at what has jolted you, you see an empty boat. You guess that the boat must have come loose from its moorings and that the current must have carried it toward you. You feel no anger. What is the difference in your responses to the two situations? In the first incident, were you holding an opinion or building a story about how you think someone ought to behave in a boat? Did this story justify your anger? In the second incident, you had no reaction. You might accept a boat drifting in the water as part of the flow of what happens with the force of tides and experience the collision as just part of life. You have no irritation toward it. These two stories illustrate how we project interpretations onto our experiences. When we are subject to such interpretations, we lose the freedom of the Buddha. We lose the freedom the Buddha described when he said that in the seen is only the seen, in the hearing only the heard, in the smelling only the smell, in the touching only the touch, and in the thinking only the thought. Understanding the first step in this cycle of how we create our world invites us to investigate all the unexamined stories and habit patterns we carry, which influence how we see the world. The Buddha called these stories ignorance. When we are unable to see, when we are ignorant of what we are doing, we keep repeating the cycle of distorted perceptions, actions, and beliefs. The Buddha called this endless loop samsara, which means cycles of existence. It is as though we were living in a dream where one cycle follows another without our actually knowing what is going on. Let us now look at the 12 links of dependent origination that the Buddha outlined to describe samsara. An investigation into the links of dependent origination traditionally begins with ignorance, but it does not have to. It can begin anywhere in the cycle. The sequence of steps can be described in two ways, either through 3 lifespans or in the moment-to-moment interaction in our lives. I'm just going to pause here and say I'm not too sure if the Buddha would agree with her saying it can start anywhere, because I believe it was taught by the Buddha as this comes first, this comes second, this comes third. So I'm not too sure about that statement, if it can start anywhere. So I'll just screen share the words.
It's an ongoing challenge, eh?
I'm not too sure what happened here. Let me see. I can get rid of some things. There we go. Okay, so those are the 12 steps if you want to, oops. I'm just trying to get them to be the size of the page here. Okay, I'll stop fiddling. So if you want to, I'm going to be reading them one at a time, so if you want to just write them down as I read them, because this is what you're going to use to figure out your scenario that you'll share next week. So the cycle described in brief: ignorance, karmic formations, which are intentions, are conscious intentions, our willed actions, thoughts, and words, depends upon the condition of ignorance. Ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, that there's suffering, that it's caused by desire, that it can end, and the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to the ending. And then consciousness arises.
Is that
So-
number 2?
Number 3. So number 1 is ignorance. Number 2 is our intentions. So if you see that sort of as the first, one lifetime, so then our intentional actions and thoughts and speech sort of determine our rebirth. And then when we're born into the next life, then you become conscious when you're at some point in the womb, or when you're born, you become conscious. And then along with consciousness comes our mental and physical existence. We have a body, we have a mind. And then in that body we have the 6 sense faculties: eyes, ears, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. And in Buddhism, the mind is one of our sense faculties. And then our eyes or ears or tongue or whatever sense faculty, it makes contact with external. So the eyes make contact with visual objects, the nose with smells, the tongue with tastes, etc. And then we're going to have a feeling tone arise with that. When we see something, our instant perception of it is something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. When we taste something, instantly there's a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sort of reaction to it. So that's the feeling tone, Vedana. And then from that, doesn't have to happen, but from that, we can crave, either wanting to have the pleasant thing or wanting to get rid of the unpleasant thing. And then once craving is there, if we decide to carry through, you could have a feeling of craving and then drop it. But if you sort of say, you get the craving and then you start planning how you're going to get the item or get rid of the item, then that's the clinging, or upadana, the taking up. And then that creates an emotional state in your life. And then that all conditions your next birth. And then with birth, of course, comes aging, illness, death. So those are the 12 steps. So the author's saying, let us create another scenario. So the first scenario was the rowboat being hit. So she said, let us create another scenario to clarify these links. So she has a character called James, and James is just starting a market research business. But he feels a little insecure about how successful he will be. James' desire for success in this business is not just about making money. It is also about his sense of self-worth. For he has struggled a lot, especially with his parents and siblings, to prove that he is okay. James is walking down Main Street thinking about his new business, and he is caught in the unconscious desire to be someone. His shoulders are a little tight, his chin juts forward, and his jaws are clenched. As he passes a Mazda car dealership, he sees his neighbor, Richard, staring at a new model sports car. The car is sleek, and the red metal gleams brilliantly in the morning light. Its hood is open, and the engine proclaims power to all who pass by. Richard greets James, then turns and walks away, disgustedly remembering how a hotshot in a car just like this one ran a red light yesterday and almost caused an accident. But James stops, lingering in pleasure at what he sees. This car is a beauty. As he stands in front of it, desire takes hold of him. He wants this car. The longer he stands there, the stronger the desire becomes. His initial arguments to himself about not having enough money to pay for the car fall away. He feels he must have it. He walks through the doors of the showroom and finds a salesperson. As he test drives the car, he knows that this car is him. He feels important. The car is thrilling to drive and gives him pleasure. He buys the car. And the next day he drives it to his parents' home to show it off. 3 months later, as James is rushing to an appointment, anxious to make a good impression on a prospective client, he opens his car door, jumps in, turns the key, impatient to get going. He stops for a red light, and while waiting, he realizes he is already taking the car for granted. It really has not made much of a difference in how happy he is. Let us re-examine this story in terms of the links of the dependent origination cycle. We start with ignorance. The stories, habit patterns, and other unexamined opinions we have inherited from our past that influence the way we experience the world and ourselves. They affect how we see, hear, taste, smell, and experience touch and thoughts. James is not aware of how his thoughts, feelings, and need to prove himself have been powerful forces in his life and a screen through which he has interpreted the world around him. He is not aware of how his desire to make something of himself is based on his assumption that he is not good enough. This necessity to become somebody has closed his capacity to see that his deepest empowerment would come from cultivating awareness and loving kindness, not from getting something. Ignorance could be defined as not understanding what causes our suffering and the ways to end it. We may devote ourselves to armoring ourselves against life and the world, to collecting things, or to becoming rich and famous, all in the conviction that these actions will bring about lasting happiness. We may believe that the beauty of our bodies will fulfill our lives. None of these things is bad or wrong in itself, but they all compel us to act out of a collection of accumulated beliefs rather than out of an understanding of what is true. When James first looked at the sports car, he did not see the color just as color, and the shape of the car as its particular shape. What he saw was influenced by ignorance, the story of not being good enough and needing something more in order to feel good about himself. With these unexamined beliefs and stories as a condition, karmic formations arise. Karmic formation is the movement of our unconscious ideas and beliefs into our intention to manifest them. It includes the energies we direct toward achieving the goals held in the stories we carry. In James' scenario, karmic formation is the movement of his intention to become somebody through his new business adventure. The first non-specific impression of our world is called consciousness, which depends on karmic formations as a condition. Consciousness becomes the next step in the expression of our intentions, manifesting as a general awareness of sensations that enter through one of the senses. James is aware in a very general way of the cars going by on the street, other pedestrians on the sidewalk, and the automobile dealership he is passing, without noticing anything specifically. Consciousness comprises visual, auditory, taste, smell, and mind consciousness. but one sense consciousness predominates at any given time. These general impressions of consciousness become the conditions for becoming more involved and solidified in the world through our mental and physical existence. James's mind and body are the expression of the willing of karmic formations and consciousness towards his goal of becoming someone special. His body and mind disclose this in how his body is walking, his hunched shoulders and clenched jaw, and in how his perceptions and memories come into being and are directed. Mind and body become the conditions for the six sense organs to manifest. We now interact with the world through the sense organs. James notices the car dealership through the general impression of visual consciousness, and his eyes are awakened. Once his eyes have been awakened, contact takes place. James notices the details of the Mazda, its red gleaming metal shining through the window. Contact could also be auditory, between our ears and sound, or olfactory, between our tongue and food, or touch, through our body and whatever is touching it. Thought is also the object of the sense-based mind. With contact comes feeling. In these teachings, feeling does not mean emotion, but rather the experience of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Every moment when one of our senses has contact, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant feelings arise. When James sees the red sports car, pleasant sensations occur. It feels good to him just to stand there and look at it. When we experience pleasure, our habitual response is to desire more pleasure. As James feels pleasure at seeing the sports car, desire arises. He wants it. This wanting is called craving. With craving as a condition, clinging can arise. James might have stopped in front of the dealership, experienced the desire and even the craving to purchase the car, but contemplated his finances and continued to walk past. Clinging is not walking away, but going with the craving. James walks into the dealership with clinging for the car. Clinging brings the conditions for what is called becoming. When James drives the car, he is thrilled and feels he has become the somebody he had wanted to be. He feels special because he is now driving the dashing red sports car. With becoming as a condition, birth arises. James buys the car and feels he has created, or we could say birthed, the person he really wants to be, proving to everyone that he is worthy of respect and love. With birth as a condition, death arises. The term death describes the passing away of experiences. Three months later, James notices he no longer has the same feelings about the car. As he sits at the red light and notices the change in his feelings, he feels the beginning of a whole new cycle, now in relation to the new client. It is exciting to be able to trace the sequence of events in our experiences and to begin to demystify how the solid sense of identity arises. The Buddha's teachings on dependent origination describe the interconnectedness of all life and how each moment of experience has arisen from particular conditions. When we bring understanding to what is happening in the very moment, we can interrupt the cycles. We can explore how our thoughts and opinions determine how we interact in the world. Why Richard walked away, but James went into the showroom. We can investigate how they affect our perceptions. Are we really seeing what we are seeing, or are we superimposing, as James did, our ideas and desires so that our perceptions become distorted? Are we aware of the experience of pleasantness or unpleasantness and how our habitual mind moves into craving, as James's did, or aversion, as Richard's did? It is remarkable to see how many stories we build up in our lives around the experience of pleasantness or unpleasantness. What happens when we become one with these stories? Do we feel righteous? Do we feel relaxed, free? Understanding dependent origination provides a framework within which we can understand our momentary experiences and the unconscious repetition of events that builds clinging into the prison of I. The other links of the Eightfold Path provide detailed practices that give us the tools to challenge the cycle and transform it. Okay, so that's the presentation for tonight. So open it up for any questions or discussion.